I don't think this is going to work. Those were the first words Charlotte Whitmore said before she even finished her glass of water. The restaurant was quiet in that careful way upscale places always are, where every sound feels expensive and every silence feels judged. Ethan Carter didn't react right away. He simply looked at her across the small table, his hands resting loosely near the edge, calm in a way that didn't ask for attention. Outside the tall glass windows, the city of Chicago moved like it always did, fast and indifferent, headlights stretching into the evening like streaks of fading gold. Charlotte adjusted her blazer slightly, already halfway out of the moment, her expression composed but distant, like she had already written the ending before the conversation even began. I just don't think we're aligned, she continued, her tone polished, practiced, the kind of voice used to ending meetings and expectations at the same time. Ethan gave a small nod, not defensive, not surprised, just present. Beside him, little Olivia Carter swung her feet gently under the chair, watching everything with quiet curiosity, her sketchbook resting against her knees. It's okay, Ethan said finally, his voice steady and low. You don't have to force anything that doesn't feel right. That sentence, simple as it was, made Charlotte pause for half a second longer than she intended. Most men tried to argue, to explain, to salvage. He didn't. He just accepted it like weather. Charlotte stood, smoothing her sleeve again, signaling the end without needing to say it. Her assistant Marcus Hale waited near the entrance, already holding the door open as if anticipating her decision from the start. I'll send my driver, Marcus said softly as she approached. You were right. Not the right match. Charlotte didn't respond immediately. Her heels clicked softly against the marble floor as she moved toward the exit, each step clean, decisive, final. Behind her, Ethan remained seated. He didn't follow. He didn't call out. He simply reached over and gently straightened the napkin in front of Olivia, who looked up at him with a small, knowing smile that only children seem to understand. Daddy, she whispered. She didn't even ask who you are. Ethan's eyes softened slightly, but his voice stayed calm. Not everyone needs to know, he replied. Charlotte pushed through the glass doors into the cool evening air, expecting relief, expecting clarity, expecting nothing more than a clean ending. But instead, she stopped. Across the street, lining the curb like a silent formation, were vehicles she didn't recognize at first glance. Black paint, flawless finish, tinted windows reflecting the city lights like mirrors. A row of supercars stretching further than she could immediately count. Her steps slowed. Marcus, catching up behind her, followed her gaze and frowned. That's unusual, he muttered. Charlotte said nothing. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she studied the scene, something subtle shifting behind her composed expression. One of the valet attendants across the street lowered his head respectfully towards someone stepping out of the restaurant behind her. Charlotte turned slowly, just enough to see Ethan Carter standing at the entrance, holding Olivia's hand. The same man she had just dismissed without hesitation. The same man she had decided was ordinary. And yet, as the evening wind moved gently through the street, every person near those cars seemed to recognize him in a way she suddenly did not. Marcus's voice dropped. Wait, those cars they're registered under. He stopped himself mid-sentence, as if the realization refused to fully form out loud. Charlotte's breath caught quietly, not dramatically, not visibly, but enough to change the rhythm of her thoughts. Ethan didn't look at the cars. He looked at his daughter. And then, briefly, just briefly, his eyes lifted toward Charlotte across the street. Not accusing, not emotional, just steady, as if nothing about this moment needed explanation at all. The night air outside the restaurant felt colder than Charlotte Whitmore expected, but it was not the temperature that unsettled her. It was the silence behind her own certainty. She stood near the curb, her arms folded lightly, eyes fixed on the line of black supercars stretching along the street like something staged for a private event she had not been invited to understand. Marcus Hale stepped closer, lowering his voice as if the street itself might be listening. Charlotte, this does not make sense, he said carefully. Those vehicles are not rental fleet models. They are individually registered, high-tier custom builds. Charlotte did not respond immediately. Her gaze remained forward, but her attention had shifted entirely. Ethan Carter was still standing near the entrance, now crouching slightly to adjust the strap on his daughter Olivia Carter's small backpack. The gesture was simple, familiar, almost ordinary, yet everything around it felt increasingly misplaced. Olivia tugged gently at her father's sleeve. "Daddy, are we leaving now?" she asked softly. Ethan smiled, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. "Yes, sweetheart. We are heading home soon." Charlotte heard the word home, and for some reason it landed differently than she expected. Not dramatic, not emotional, just real. Marcus checked his phone again, his thumb scrolling quickly. "This cannot be a coincidence," he muttered. "There is no known event listed at this location tonight, no reservation logs, no corporate gathering." Charlotte finally turned her head slightly toward him. "Then explain it," she said quietly. Marcus hesitated, then looked back at Ethan again. One of the valet attendants approached Ethan with respectful familiarity, offering the keys to a black vehicle that reflected the streetlights like polished glass. The attendant did not ask for confirmation. He simply handed them over with a slight nod. Charlotte's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "He is not just a single father," Marcus said under his breath, almost unwilling to complete the thought. Charlotte ignored him, but her eyes did not leave Ethan. Ethan lifted Olivia into his arms effortlessly, as if it was routine, as if nothing about the world around him had changed in the last 5 minutes. He walked toward one of the vehicles without hesitation. The door unlocked with a soft electronic tone as he approached. Charlotte's heels clicked once against the pavement as she instinctively took a step forward, then stopped. She was not sure why she moved. Ethan paused briefly before opening the car door. For a moment, he looked across the street again. This time, his gaze was not distant. It was direct enough that Charlotte felt it like a quiet interruption in her thoughts. Marcus swallowed. "Charlotte," he said, "that is not normal access. That level of security clearance is reserved for executive ownership." Charlotte's mind replayed the evening in fragments. The simple answers Ethan gave. The absence of effort to impress. The way he accepted rejection without resistance. None of it matched the scene unfolding in front of her. Olivia leaned against her father's shoulder and whispered something that made him smile faintly. Charlotte could not hear the words, but she saw the warmth in his expression, and it contrasted sharply with everything she had assumed moments earlier. The car door closed softly as Ethan placed Olivia inside. The sound felt final, but not in the way she expected. It felt like something she had misunderstood rather than something she had lost. Marcus lowered his voice even further. "I think we made a serious miscalculation about who he is." Charlotte remained still, her eyes fixed on Ethan as he moved around the vehicle with calm familiarity. The city continued behind them, unaware of the shift that had just begun to unfold on a single street corner. And for the first time that evening, Charlotte Whitmore did not have a response ready. Charlotte Whitmore remained standing at the edge of the sidewalk as the black supercars continued to idle in silence, their polished surfaces reflecting fragments of city light like broken mirrors. The air around her felt heavier now, not because anything had changed physically, but because her interpretation of everything she had just witnessed was no longer stable. Marcus Hale stood slightly behind her, still scanning his phone with increasing urgency, his expression tightening with each passing second. "There is no public record of a fleet deployment in this district," he said quietly, almost to himself. "These vehicles are registered under multiple subsidiaries, all tied to a single private ownership structure." Charlotte's voice was lower than before when she finally spoke. "Then who owns them?" Marcus hesitated, and that hesitation alone was enough to deepen the uncertainty. Across the street, Ethan Carter opened the driver door and placed Olivia Carter carefully into the back seat, securing her seatbelt with a gentle familiarity that suggested repetition, not novelty. Olivia swung her legs slightly, looking out the window with innocent curiosity, completely unaware of the tension unfolding outside. Charlotte watched closely as Ethan paused for a moment before closing the door. The movement was unhurried, calm, and controlled, as if the entire environment responded to his timing rather than the other way around. Marcus lowered his phone. "Charlotte," he said carefully, "I just cross-checked one of the license plates. It is tied to a corporate entity under the name Carter Holdings Group." The words landed slowly in her mind, each syllable reshaping the assumptions she had formed minutes earlier. "Carter Holdings Group," she repeated. Marcus nodded once. "Private investment structure. Minimal public visibility. High asset consolidation. Extremely selective disclosures." Charlotte's eyes returned to Ethan. He was now walking along the side of the vehicle, his hand briefly resting on the roof as he leaned slightly toward the open window, speaking softly to his daughter. The interaction was simple, but it carried a kind of ease that did not match anything she had associated with wealth at that level. There was no performance, no display, no awareness of being observed. Charlotte took a slow breath, then asked, "Why would someone like that agree to a blind date through a standard executive networking service?" Marcus shook his head slightly. "That is what I do not understand. Profiles like his are usually filtered out at the verification stage." A quiet moment passed between them, filled only by the soft hum of engines and distant traffic. Then Marcus added, "Unless he never submitted a full profile at all." Charlotte frowned slightly. "Explain." Marcus looked back at Ethan again. "Unless he allowed them to underestimate him on purpose." That idea lingered in the space between them without resolution. Ethan closed the car door gently and walked toward the driver's side, his movements unhurried and precise. Before entering, he stopped once more and looked across the street again. This time, Charlotte did not look away. Their eyes met briefly across the distance. No smile formed. No acknowledgement was offered. But something unspoken passed in that moment. Something that made Charlotte's earlier confidence feel less certain than she remembered. Ethan opened the door, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. The sound was smooth, controlled, almost quiet despite the power beneath it. The supercar's lights illuminated the street in a soft glow before the vehicle slowly pulled away from the curb. Olivia's small hand waved once from the back seat, directed not at Charlotte, but at the night itself. Charlotte remained still as the car merged into traffic, followed by the remaining vehicles in the line. One by one, they disappeared into the city, leaving behind only the faint echo of engines and unanswered questions. Marcus finally lowered his phone completely. "We should reevaluate everything we assumed about him," he said. Charlotte did not respond immediately. Her eyes stayed on the empty stretch of road where the cars had been. For the first time that evening, her conclusions no longer felt like conclusions at all. Inside the back seat of the black sedan that had come to retrieve Charlotte Whitmore, the city lights blurred past in long reflective streaks, but she was no longer looking outside. Her attention was fixed inward, replaying every moment from the evening with unsettling clarity. Marcus Hale sat across from her in the vehicle, still reviewing his tablet, his expression now fully serious. No longer the confident assistant, but someone trying to reconstruct a reality that no longer matched the assumptions they had brought with them. "I have started pulling everything available on Carter Holdings Group," Marcus said quietly, breaking the silence. "What is strange is not what is listed, but what is missing." Charlotte's eyes lifted slightly. "Missing?" Marcus nodded. "There are no press releases, no public interviews, no executive board listings. It is structured like a major enterprise, but operates with near-complete anonymity." Charlotte leaned back slowly, her hands resting in her lap, her voice quieter than before. "That is not normal for someone at that level of wealth." Marcus hesitated before responding. "No, it is not." A long pause followed, filled only by the soft hum of the vehicle moving through downtown traffic. Charlotte turned her head toward the window, but her reflection stared back at her instead of the world outside. Ethan Carter's face appeared in her memory again, not as a businessman, not as a mystery, but as he had been in the restaurant. Calm, unaffected, unconcerned with approval. "He did not try to impress me once," she said slowly, almost to herself. Marcus glanced up. Most people in his position would have made it obvious within the first 5 minutes. Charlotte's voice tightened slightly, and he did the opposite. Marcus tapped the screen again. "There is something else." Charlotte looked at him. "Go on." Marcus turned the tablet toward her. On the screen was a compiled financial footprint analysis. Multiple subsidiaries, international holdings, and transportation assets all quietly linked under one umbrella structure. At the center of it all was a single repeated name, Ethan Carter. Charlotte stared at the screen without blinking. The simplicity of the name contrasted sharply with the scale beneath it. This level of consolidation, Marcus continued carefully, suggests long-term planning. Not inheritance. Not coincidence. Intentional structure. Charlotte's thoughts drifted back to Olivia Carter's voice in the restaurant, small and innocent, asking if they were leaving now. The contrast between that moment and what she was seeing now created a growing tension she could not easily resolve. Why would someone like that accept a blind date arranged through a standard executive network? She asked again. But this time the question carried less confidence and more uncertainty. Marcus lowered the tablet slightly. Either he was testing the environment, or he was never interested in being evaluated at face value. Charlotte exhaled slowly, her composure still intact, but no longer absolute. I evaluated him in less than 5 minutes, she admitted quietly. Marcus did not respond. The car continued forward through the city, but Charlotte was no longer thinking about where she was going. She was thinking about the moment she had chosen to leave, and the man who had allowed her to leave without a single attempt to stop her. And for the first time in a long time, Charlotte Whitmore realized that silence could carry more weight than any argument she had ever won. The city lights outside the moving vehicle no longer felt like background scenery to Charlotte Whitmore. They felt like signals she could no longer interpret with certainty. Each passing block carried her further away from the restaurant, but not further away from the questions forming in her mind. Marcus Hale remained focused on his tablet, but his earlier confidence had softened into something more cautious, as if he too was aware that the framework they had used to evaluate Ethan Carter no longer held steady. I have expanded the search parameters across offshore registries, Marcus said after a long pause. What I am seeing suggests that Carter Holdings Group is not recent. The structure has been in place for over a decade, possibly longer. Charlotte turned slightly toward him. 10 years or more. Marcus nodded once. And it appears to have grown without external visibility. No media coverage, no public shareholder activity, no conventional market exposure. Charlotte's voice was quieter now. That is not something built by accident. Marcus agreed. No, it is deliberate isolation. The words lingered in the space between them as the car continued through the night streets of Chicago. Charlotte leaned back against the seat, her eyes no longer focused on anything outside. Instead, she was reconstructing Ethan Carter in her mind, not as a failed blind date, not as a man she had dismissed, but as someone operating entirely outside the assumptions she had brought with her. She remembered the way he had spoken, not with hesitation, but with simplicity. No effort to elevate himself. No need to defend his place in the world. Just calm presence. Marcus broke the silence. Again, this time more carefully. There is one more detail. Charlotte looked at him without speaking. Marcus turned the tablet slightly. The vehicle cluster we observed earlier is not just ownership access. It is active deployment authorization. That level of control typically requires direct executive clearance. Charlotte frowned slightly. You were saying he was not just present there. He controls it. Marcus nodded. Yes. The car slowed slightly at a traffic light, and the city outside briefly reflected across Charlotte's face like fragmented light. For the first time since the evening began, her expression lost its certainty. Then why, she asked slowly, would someone with that level of control accept being evaluated like an ordinary candidate in a blind introduction system? Marcus hesitated before answering. That is the question I cannot resolve yet. Charlotte looked down at her hands, as if expecting them to provide clarity that her environment no longer offered. I made a judgment based on appearance, context, and assumption, she said quietly. Marcus did not interrupt, and I left before I had any real understanding of who he was. The silence that followed was heavier than before, not uncomfortable, but reflective. Marcus finally spoke again. If it matters, you were not the only one who miscalculated. The entire matching system categorized him as low engagement risk and standard profile. Charlotte gave a faint, almost imperceptible shake of her head. That system was wrong. Marcus responded carefully. Or incomplete. The car resumed motion, merging into a wider avenue lined with high-rise buildings. Charlotte looked out again, but this time she was not searching for answers in the city. She was searching for a pattern in her own reaction. Ethan Carter had not revealed anything explicitly. He had simply existed without adjustment. And somehow, that had been enough to overturn everything she thought she understood about people like him. Charlotte's voice softened as she spoke, almost to herself. He did not need to prove anything. Marcus closed the tablet slightly. No, he did not. And for the first time that night, Charlotte Whitmore stopped trying to define Ethan Carter through data and started considering the possibility that she had been measuring him with the wrong scale entirely. The car carrying Charlotte Whitmore continued moving through the quiet late-night streets of Chicago, but the sense of direction inside it felt increasingly uncertain. The city outside remained bright in contrast, illuminated by office towers and traffic signals. Yet inside the vehicle, the atmosphere had shifted into something far more reflective. Marcus Hale finally set the tablet down on his lap, no longer scrolling through data, as if even the numbers had stopped providing clarity. Charlotte sat still, her gaze fixed forward, but her attention was no longer on the road ahead. It was on the absence of certainty that now defined everything she thought she knew about Ethan Carter. After several moments of silence, Marcus spoke in a lower tone. "There is something else I did not mention earlier because I was still verifying it." Charlotte turned her head slightly. "What is it?" Marcus hesitated before responding. "Carter Holdings Group is not only structured for privacy. It appears to be structured for avoidance of influence. That means its founder deliberately built systems that prevent external pressure, including social, corporate, and personal interference." Charlotte absorbed the information slowly. Why would someone design that level of separation? Marcus answered carefully. "Usually, people do it when they value control over perception, or when they have experienced what happens when perception becomes more important than truth." The words settled heavily between them. Charlotte looked out the window again, but the reflections of the city now felt less like lights and more like fragments of assumptions she could no longer fully trust. She thought back to the restaurant again, not the moment she left, but the moments before that decision. Ethan Carter had not reacted to her evaluation. He had not adjusted his behavior to meet her expectations. He had remained unchanged, as if her judgment was not relevant to his identity at all. That realization unsettled her more than anything she had learned since. Marcus checked his device one more time before speaking again. "There is also an operational note here that was not in the initial summary." Charlotte responded without looking at him. "Go on." "His residential location is registered within a private low-density district outside the city, approximately 45 minutes from downtown Chicago. No public access listings. No real estate marketing history. The property is fully self-contained." Charlotte processed this slowly. "He is not embedded in the corporate world," she said quietly. Marcus nodded. "Not in the conventional sense." The car passed beneath an elevated stretch of roadway, briefly dimming the interior. Charlotte folded her hands together, her voice softer now. "Everything I used to define him was incorrect." Marcus did not disagree. Instead, he simply said, "It was incomplete data interpreted as complete truth." Charlotte allowed a long silence to settle again. This time, it did not feel empty. It felt corrective. She thought about Olivia Carter, the small voice, the natural ease, the absence of performance. She thought about Ethan Carter's calm acceptance of her departure, as if rejection had no authority over him. And for the first time, she did not interpret it as indifference. She considered the possibility that it had been certainty. The vehicle slowed slightly as it approached an intersection near the outskirts of downtown. Marcus glanced at her briefly. "What do you want to do now?" he asked. Charlotte did not answer immediately. Her eyes remained on the passing lights outside, but her thoughts were no longer moving away from Ethan Carter. They were moving toward him, slowly, deliberately, as if for the first time she was no longer observing from a distance, but beginning to question what it would mean to understand him directly. The vehicle continued its steady movement through the outskirts of Chicago, where the glow of downtown began to fade into quieter stretches of road lined with intermittent streetlights. Inside, Charlotte Whitmore remained silent, her posture composed, but her thoughts no longer anchored to certainty. Marcus Hale had shifted in his seat, no longer focused on analysis, but on something closer to reflection, as if the data he had been gathering was no longer sufficient to describe what they were dealing with. After a long pause, Marcus spoke carefully. "There is one more layer to this structure that I have just confirmed." Charlotte turned slightly, her expression unchanged but attentive. "Explain." Marcus adjusted his grip on the tablet before responding. "Carter Holdings Group is not only isolated in operation, it is also insulated from acquisition attempts. Multiple recorded buyout efforts over the last decade were declined without negotiation." Charlotte narrowed her eyes slightly. "Declined without negotiation?" Marcus nodded. "Not rejected after review. Simply never engaged." A silence followed, heavier than the previous ones. Charlotte leaned back slightly, her voice quieter now. "That means he does not respond to external pressure at all." Marcus agreed. It suggests that financial leverage does not apply to him in the conventional sense. The words hung in the air as the car passed under a series of dim overpasses. Charlotte's reflection appeared faintly in the window beside her, fragmented by motion and light. She studied it briefly before speaking again. People at that level usually seek visibility, influence, or expansion. Marcus responded, yes. This structure suggests the opposite intention. Preservation, not expansion. Charlotte exhaled slowly, her composure still intact, but now carrying a different weight. She looked forward again, but her focus was no longer on the present route. It had shifted entirely to Ethan Carter, and the absence of category she could place him into. He did not behave like someone trying to be understood, she said quietly. Marcus lowered his gaze. No, he behaved like someone who does not require interpretation. The phrase lingered between them, reshaping the silence that followed. Charlotte's thoughts returned to the restaurant once more, but now she noticed details she had previously dismissed. The way Ethan Carter had responded without urgency. The absence of explanation when most people would have provided it. The lack of reaction when she had chosen to leave. None of it fit the frameworks she was used to applying in her world. The car slowed slightly as it approached a quieter residential corridor at the edge of the city. Marcus finally spoke again. If everything we have analyzed is accurate, then tonight's interaction was not an anomaly for him. Charlotte turned toward him. What do you mean? Marcus answered carefully. It may have been routine exposure to misjudgment. Charlotte did not respond immediately. The idea settled in her mind in a way that felt uncomfortable, not because it was illogical, but because it suggested a pattern she had not considered. Ethan Carter did not react as someone surprised by being underestimated. He reacted as someone familiar with it. The realization shifted something subtle in her understanding. The vehicle continued forward through the quiet streets, but Charlotte's attention remained suspended in thought. For the first time since the evening began, she was no longer trying to classify Ethan Carter. She was trying to understand what kind of life would make silence more natural than explanation. The vehicle carrying Charlotte Whitmore slowed as it entered a quieter residential zone outside the central Chicago corridor, where streetlights were spaced farther apart, and the buildings shifted from glass towers to understated private estates. Inside the car, the atmosphere had changed from analytical to contemplative. Marcus Hale no longer scrolled through data. Instead, he sat with the tablet resting idle in his hands, as if the information it contained had already reached its limit in explaining what they were witnessing. Charlotte remained still, her gaze directed forward, but her focus was no longer on the physical road. It was on the internal reconstruction of everything she thought she understood about Ethan Carter. After several moments of silence, Marcus finally spoke in a lowered tone. There is something I have just verified through cross-jurisdictional records. Charlotte turned slightly. Go on. Marcus adjusted his posture before continuing. The ownership structure tied to Carter Holdings Group is not only private. It is also intentionally segmented across multiple legal frameworks in different states. That means no single institution has full visibility. Charlotte narrowed her eyes slightly. Why would someone design something like that? Marcus answered carefully. To prevent consolidation of control, or to avoid becoming dependent on external validation systems. Charlotte absorbed the statement slowly. That sounds less like business strategy, she said quietly, and more like isolation. Marcus did not immediately respond, and that silence confirmed her interpretation more than any explanation could. The car continued forward, passing a stretch of road bordered by tall trees that partially obscured the streetlights. Shadows moved across the interior of the vehicle, briefly obscuring Charlotte's reflection. When it reappeared, she noticed something different in her own expression. It was no longer certainty. It was analysis without confidence. Everything I use to measure people like him, Charlotte said after a long pause, does not apply here. Marcus nodded once. That is becoming increasingly evident. Charlotte exhaled slowly, her voice quieter now. He did not react to me the way people normally do. Marcus looked up. Most people would attempt to correct perception immediately. Charlotte continued. He did not correct anything. He simply allowed it to remain. The car turned slightly onto a narrower road, where the surrounding environment became more residential and less commercial. The shift in surroundings matched the shift in conversation, both moving away from public visibility towards something more private and difficult to interpret. Marcus spoke again, carefully choosing his words. Based on behavioral pattern analysis, individuals who do not respond to misjudgment typically fall into one of two categories. Either they are indifferent, or they are accustomed to operating beyond the need for external approval. Charlotte considered this quietly. Which category fits him? Marcus paused before answering. At this stage, I cannot confirm either. Charlotte looked out the window again, this time noticing the stillness of the neighborhood more clearly. It was not empty. It was controlled, balanced, intentional. The kind of environment that suggested stability rather than display. Her thoughts returned once more to Ethan Carter's final moment at the restaurant. The way he had not followed. The way he had not attempted to explain. The way he had simply remained unchanged as she left. That absence of reaction now felt more significant than any action she had observed. Marcus finally set the tablet aside completely. There is one more observation I would like to add, he said. Charlotte turned slightly toward him. What is it? Marcus replied. People with this level of structural independence usually do not appear in systems designed for social evaluation. His presence there may have been intentional, but not for the purpose of being assessed. Charlotte's expression tightened slightly. Then what was the purpose? Marcus answered honestly. That is what we do not yet understand. The car continued forward through the quiet residential road, and for the first time since the beginning of the evening, Charlotte Whitmore did not feel like she was observing an event. She felt like she had entered a situation that was still unfolding beyond her ability to define it. The vehicle carrying Charlotte Whitmore slowed as it turned onto a quieter residential avenue, where the city's brightness softened into rows of evenly spaced streetlights and well-kept homes. Inside the car, the atmosphere had shifted again, no longer driven by rapid analysis, but by a quieter tension of understanding forming too slowly to feel complete. Marcus Hale sat with the tablet now fully inactive, his attention no longer anchored to data streams, but to the implications of what those data streams had already revealed. Charlotte remained still, her gaze fixed ahead, but her thoughts were no longer following the road. They were following a pattern that refused to resolve cleanly. After a long silence, Marcus finally spoke. There is one final consolidated summary I have compiled. Charlotte turned slightly toward him. Go on. Marcus took a measured breath before continuing. Across all verified systems, there is no evidence that Ethan Carter participates in traditional corporate visibility structures. No interviews. No public filings under personal name beyond legal minimums. No presence in industry forums. Charlotte listened without interruption. Marcus continued. Yet operational control indicators confirm he is directly linked to multiple high-tier asset networks, including transportation, real estate, and private equity holdings. Charlotte's voice was quieter now. So he exists everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Marcus nodded slowly. That is one way to interpret it. The car moved under a canopy of trees where the streetlights flickered through the branches, casting shifting patterns across the interior. Charlotte's reflection appeared fragmented in the window, briefly interrupted by motion and shadow. She studied it without expression before speaking again. I made an assumption about him within minutes, she said. Based on appearance, behavior, and context. Marcus responded carefully. That is standard in most evaluation systems. Charlotte shook her head slightly. It was not enough. A silence followed, deeper than before. Marcus finally added, if anything, your reaction was consistent with the system he likely expects from strangers. Charlotte looked at him. What does that mean? Marcus chose his words with caution. It means he may already be accustomed to being underestimated, and more importantly, not affected by it. Charlotte leaned back, her voice lower. He did not try to change my perception. Marcus replied, that appears to be consistent across all available behavioral observations. The car continued forward, passing through a section of road where the houses were set farther apart, each property separated by dark lawns and minimal lighting. The environment felt controlled, deliberate, and intentionally quiet. Charlotte watched it pass, but her focus remained inward. She replayed the final moment at the restaurant again, not the decision to leave, but the absence of reaction that followed it. There had been no pursuit, no correction, no attempt to alter her conclusion, only acceptance, as if her interpretation had no authority over his reality. Marcus broke the silence once more. At this point, we can confirm one consistent pattern. Charlotte turned slightly. What pattern? Marcus answered, "He does not engage with perception as a metric of value." Charlotte repeated the phrase quietly, as if testing its meaning. Perception as a metric of value. Marcus nodded. Yes, he appears to operate outside of it. The car slowed briefly as it approached a gated intersection near the edge of the residential district. The gate opened automatically, revealing a long private road extending into darkness. Charlotte looked ahead, her expression unchanged, but something in her understanding had shifted again. Not toward clarity, but toward recognition of scale she had not previously considered. Marcus spoke one final time. "We are no longer evaluating a standard profile." Charlotte did not respond immediately. As the vehicle entered the private road, she finally said, almost quietly, "I understand that now." And for the first time since the evening began, Charlotte Whitmore stopped trying to define Ethan Carter entirely, and instead began to consider the possibility that he was never meant to be defined in the way she first attempted. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more stories of courage, kindness, and second chances, because the people the world overlooks often leave the greatest impact.